Look around and you will see the gifts of God are always free. You may know what they inspire. Ask a stone and let it try to tell you what it's meant to be. Do stones tell you what one told me? This simple rock is very plain, but its being here is not in vain. If it were gold or a priceless stone, it wouldn't have meaning for me alone. And if it were in great demand, I wouldn't find one in all of the land. What does it mean to me? I know. I saw it on the ground below. I picked it up, and I wondered why I did not just pass it by. A souvenir from my own land, and I held it in my hand, drawing back to cast away. But I couldn't when I heard it say, there's life in all that God has made, born when this foundation was laid. The earth was formed by him alone. He made you man, but me, a stone. It was thus that I was sent to spend my life in discontent while everyone had passed me by. They didn't care or even try. They looked for precious rocks instead and really thought that I was dead. But you, my friend, have leaned so low to pick me up that I will show you just what I was meant to be. So write this down where all may see. This poem you write is my own cry. To tell some people just to try to do like you. By looking low, their minds will then begin to grow. What does this stone mean, my friends? The thoughts I have will never end. What does it mean to those who care? Just ask God, he put it there. Yazoo City, Mississippi, lost more than 20% of its population in the last decade. Yazoo City, Mississippi, has a current population of about 11,000, but about 3,500 of these people are inmates at the local federal prison. Yazoo City, Mississippi has a poverty rate of 40.2%. In 2010, Yazoo City suffered from not one, but two devastating tornadoes which ripped through town just a few months apart. I was the only person to get off the train in Yazoo City, Mississippi. The only person. As I stood on the platform, I could see behind me a long row of brick buildings just crumbling and looming in the distance. It was the backside of Main Street. In front of me, leaning up against the fence between the platform and the parking lot, there was a middle-aged black man who had just waved off a bunch of his family members on the train. He was wearing dark sunglasses, a backwards baseball cap, and a mechanic's shirt with his name printed right there on the name tag. Carl. Carl introduced himself, and he asked me where I was going and if I was meeting anyone. I said, I'm Ryan, I'm going to the Econo Lodge, but no, I'm not meeting anyone because I don't know anyone, in town at least. And I knew that the motel was about 2 miles away, so I planned on just walking. Carl grabs the fence and he looks at me like I'm crazy. He says, Ryan, you can't walk all that way. He said, Ryan, I'll give you a ride. Now I'm feeling pretty wary, so I said, thanks, Carl, but I don't want to put you out of your way. Carl says, oh, Ryan, I understand. No pressure. But listen, Ryan, you're a visitor to my hometown, and I don't want to wake up tomorrow and read about you in the paper. I'm convinced. So, start walking around the fence to get into the parking lot, and I think, either I'm going to be okay, or I'm totally screwed. Yazoo City, Mississippi was the first of 7 small towns that I stopped in on a 7-week journey across America on the Amtrak. There are 314, approximately, million Americans. If you add up the population of the 10 largest American cities, you get 25 million people. So that means less than 8% of the American population lives in the 10 largest American cities, and everyone else lives in mid-sized cities, and small towns like Yazoo City, Mississippi. The goal of my trip was to experience the breadth and the color of the American identity. What does it mean to be an American? Is my experience and my life as an American any more real than yours, or that of a sushi chef in Portland, or that of a retiree in Iowa. I traveled almost 10,000 miles visiting these towns, each with a population of about 10,000 people. So 7 weeks, 10,000 miles, 7 towns, 10,000 people. Trinidad, Colorado is the self-proclaimed sex change capital of the world. Proudly so. And because it is called that because of Stanley Biber, a Korean war vet who came home to Trinidad and started pioneering in the wild world of sex changes. Now, although Dr. Biber's been dead for a couple years, the nickname continues to outlive him. Trinidad, Colorado is also a really interesting preserve. It's a unique preserve of 19th century American urbanism because all of the main streets are still paved in red brick. And the red brick was laid in the 1800s by Italian and German immigrants. It was in Trinidad that I decided one morning around 8 a.m. to walk to the top of Simpsons Rest, which is a rocky outcrop that looks over the city of Trinidad, surrounding grasslands, and the mountains beyond. There's an enormous red sign at the top of Simpsons Rest. It lights up at night, and it simply reads, Trinidad, so visitors can never forget where they are. I'm sitting up there just enjoying the morning view. I hear this truck drive up behind me. Footsteps approached, and someone called out, "Hey, you're not thinking about jumping, are you?" I turn around, and I find myself looking at this real-life, modern-day cowboy, grinning just ear to ear. His name is Troy, and he's a former rodeo jockey. Troy's come up to Simpsons Rest with his girlfriend Victoria so he can show her the view from the top. Victoria's lived in Trinidad for 9 years, and she's never been. After a while, Troy and Victoria offer me a ride back into town. So we're sitting in the pickup truck, going down the hill, and Troy started telling me all these crazy and bizarre stories about town, like the story of a local pervert who was killed by a train as he spied on some teenagers at a nearby pool. As we get to the B&B, I turn to Troy and remember he's a former rodeo jockey. I turn this way, and I said, "Troy, do you keep horses still by any chance? And is there any way I could come out and ride one?" Troy's like, "Hell yeah!" Gives me a cell phone number, and he says, "Call me this afternoon." So later that day, Troy and Victoria drove me 7 miles out of town to some property that Troy owns with his dad, Salvador. Troy takes out his old horse named Skip, saddles him up, and lends me one of his old rodeo hats, cowboy hat. It's very stiff leather, very uncomfortable, actually. And then he helps me up, and then Salvador's dad, and Victoria's girlfriend turn around and go inside to a little mobile home that's on the property to just hang out while I ride Skip. Skip is an old horse, and I am a very bad rider, so we were a match made in heaven. Troy had pulled the stirrups all the way up on the saddle, but I was still too short to reach the sides comfortably. So basically, we spent the hour just bouncing around, me clutching on for dear life with my thighs, one hand on the reins, one hand on the hat, and just whooping, whooping, whooping as I went. Astoria, Oregon, was founded by a group of fur traders who were sent by John Astor of the Waldorf Astoria Hotel. Astoria, Oregon, is the first permanent American settlement on the Pacific coast. In 1946, Ed Parsons became the man to invent cable television right there in Astoria, Oregon. Basically, what he did was he climbed to the top of the local Astor Hotel, tied a cable to the antenna there, and strung it across to his apartment across the way, and voila. Astoria, Oregon is the place where Steven Spielberg filmed his cult classic, The Goonies. I decided to take another hike in Astoria, this time to the Astor Column, which again is on a hill that overlooks the city, this time the Columbia River and Washington across. The Astor Column was built by the Astor family in 1926 as a monument to their own commercial success. You can actually climb up it. It's modeled after the Roman Trajan Column, which is a very famous Column from back in the day. And up there at the top, I was enjoying the view, and I met a man named Dan O'Brien and his Chinese girlfriend named Kathy. Dan and Kathy, again, we started talking, and they invite me to dinner. I say, why not? So we go to a local foods restaurant, and we're sitting there, eating, enjoying the meal. And then after a while, it just gets a little too long, and I was really exhausted. Dan had driven up the hill, and I had hiked it, And I'm really trying to pay attention. We're nearing like the 2-hour mark. And I'm smiling, and I'm nodding, and I'm trying to be there for him, but he's going on about the Vietnam War and economic history, and I just can't keep up. And then he stops, and he looks at me, and he looks at Kathy, and Kathy's looking at him, nodding affirmingly, and then he looks back at me, and he says, Ryan, that is the most important advice I've ever given. I had no idea what he had just said. When you're in New Orleans, trying to start a conversation with a stranger, a good question to ask is, where can I find the best fried chicken? Everyone loves food. As I kept using this opener, I kept getting the same response. Willie Mae Scotch House, Willie Mae Scotch House, Willie Mae Scotch House. And what's amazing is that probably half the people who recommended Willie Mae Scotch House had never even been. Its reputation just in the area is that legendary. Willie Mae Scotch House sits right in the middle of a suburb north of New Orleans. And a lot of the people who had recommended it warned me that it was a pretty rough neighborhood, so they recommended that I take a cab. But a cab obviously would have cost me a lot more than the meal, and I just, wasn't going to do that. So I left my cell phone and my wallet in my room and decided to walk with just a $20 bill in my pocket for the chicken. It wasn't maybe halfway there when I realized I'd done a really bad job remembering the directions. And so I acknowledged the fact that I had two options, which is to ask for directions or to turn around, which in my mind is really one option, which is to ask for directions. I'm looking around, and the only people I can see, there's two black teenagers hanging out under this enormous tree it's like in the island in the middle of the road. They're just lounging. But I didn't want to interrupt. Excuse me, do you know the way to Willie Mae's? Yeah, man, Willie Mae's. Keep going straight, take a right on Tonty, you'll be right there. The fried chicken at Willie Mae Scotch House is something to die for. It comes served with sides of rice, beans, cornbread, and as much sweet tea as you could possibly drink. I was walking back just in a stupor from this phenomenal meal. I was a little surprised. Someone shouted out to me. I look over and I see it's the same guys who had given me directions. Hey, you found it okay? Yeah, I did. Thank you. Well, how'd you like it? Oh, incredible. Good. So you'll come back then, yeah? It was my last day in Yazoo City, Mississippi. I was having brunch with the Addams family. The Addams family. The Addams family is a great family in Yazoo City, Mississippi. They're using their wealth to slowly buy up buildings downtown, fill them with businesses, and trying to breathe life back into this community that they've lived in for generations. We're sitting at this long table, maybe 10 or 11 of us, in a diner which doubled as a furniture store and was covered in these bright, fantastic paintings. The meal was as loud as it was fun, as it was playful. And at the end, an old man who sat at the other end of the table rambled on over to my side. His name was Bob Coleman, and he said, Ryan, come outside with me for a second. So we're outside, and Bob sits down on a concrete stoop. He has me sit right next to him. He's got a cane in his hand, and he has a baseball cap on his head. Turns to me and he says in his leathery and citric accent, look around and you will see the gifts of God are always free. You may know what they inspire. Ask a stone and let it try to tell you what it's meant to be. Do stones tell you what one told me? This simple rock is very plain, but its being here is not in vain. If it were gold or a priceless stone, it wouldn't have meaning for me alone. And if it were in great demand, I wouldn't find one in all of the land. And when he finished this poem, he said, "Here's your stone." Thank you.